Welcome back to the Dream Architect Life podcast. Brittany Anderson here with a guest that I am so excited to introduce you to. Today I have with me Brian Grasso. Brian is an 18-year veteran of the sports training industry. He worked as a high-performance coach for national team, professional, and Olympic athletes worldwide. He founded the largest youth development educational organizations in the industry, serving as its CEO for nearly 8 years and co-created one of the fastest growing sport and fitness franchises in the United States right along with it. He has guest lectured and keynoted at governmental and private associations around the world, including Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Italy, Sweden, the Czech Republic, and throughout North America. Brian authored The Audacity of Success, co-authored the bestseller Total Body Transformation, wrote and co-produced the landmark short film Life by Numbers, and has written for magazines around the globe, including Men's Fitness, Inked, and more. His most recent book is called Mindset Matters Most and was listed #1 on the personal development section at Amazon for a period of 7 weeks after its release. Together with his wife, Carrie Campbell, Brian co-hosted the award-winning live stream Brian and Carrie in the Morning, as well as Eliminate Your Limits with Brian and Carrie, which airs in syndication on SiriusXM. He currently serves as the Chief Culture Officer for Metaplexus, as well as the Faculty Director for its subsidiary, Virtue Academy. Brian holds a religiously accredited PhD in pastoral counseling and currently works as a business and high-performance consultant for several well-known brands in the health and wellness space, working directly with C-suite executives. On a personal level, Brian is a competitive power lifter and holds 2 Arizona State records in both squat and bench press. Don't want to mess with him. For a span of 12 years, he worked as a bodyguard for several A-list celebrities. Please help me welcome the fabulous, wonderful Brian Grasso to the show. Brian, welcome to the show.
You're my fave. Are you kidding? I can't wait to do this. And I'm so thrilled to be here. You're my favorite. I love you to death.
Well, right back at you, my friend. And we're going to dive right into the topic today. So, the thing that I hope our audience gets out of this, and that I already know, is that you are one of the most knowledgeable, masterful people when it comes to mindset. And it's not because of the fact that you are perfect in how you handle your mindset every day. It's because you're real, you're raw, and you know how to truly help people become masters themselves. So let's kick it off by, what is one of the biggest roadblocks you see people hitting when it comes to their mindset overall?
Okay, great question. It definitely is, it has a bit of an explanation to it. So if it's okay with you, Brittany, and everyone watching and listening, I always look at human performance from a trifecta standpoint. So these 3 things need to be, it's like a Venn diagram. When they're all kind of in place well, they meet in the middle, that's when you're performing really well as a human. In no particular order, mindset is the top of the pyramid there. On the bottom right, I always have neurology and gut health, because they contribute to brain health beyond words. And then the last is metaphysical. Now, I don't want that to be conflated with religion or spirituality, which is, they're a little bit too specific, those definitions, but I like the word metaphysical. Because I think, the Stoics, Lao Tzu, there are amazing books and reference points from antiquity that are incredibly enriching. And if we sink our teeth into them, we read the Tao Te Ching, we read the Bhagavad Gita, we read the Stoics and books like Meditations from Marcus Aurelius, we get a really interesting look at what life could be, what it should be, how it actually functions from a natural world perspective. So those 3 things are important, but if we center today on mindset, and pursuant to your question, I think the biggest mistake people make is in how they define mindset, because it's often mistaken for positive thinking. And really it's not. Mindset is understanding brain science. How does our brain work? How does it interact with the natural world? How does it interact with our biology, our physiology, and our neurology? And how does that lead to output? So in a schematic, it looks like this. We have input, which is stimulus coming into us, including our own thoughts. We have interpretation. That's at the neurological level. How do we interpret the information coming into us? And that's what drives our output. Now, people try to control the output. They try to create better habits, enlist better behavior, take better actions, make better decisions, or in this case, think more positively. But the problem is that in the matrix that is mindset, the downstream issues are what we always try to fix, but the downstream issues are being catalyzed by an upstream problem. In this case, how we interpret the stimulus coming into us is what drives the output. So it's not a matter of controlling the output, it's a matter of controlling the interpretation. That's all neurologically based. Now, the reason I say that, because that was a big ball of who cares, but let me get to the functionality of it. Positive thinking is an output, right? To try to frame things in a positive way constantly, there's merit to it. Like holding positive perspective matters. The problem comes, though, that we can delude or blind ourselves to the truth for quite literally our entire lives. People are very fond, for example, Brittany, of saying, like, always trust your gut or always trust what you feel. Now, neurologically and physiologically, that's really bad advice, because what we feel gut-wise, what we feel emotively, can be a product of a bias we carry in our interpretation field. And really, to unlock the truth of what our life is, who we are, what we're capable of, we have to get to the point where we're willing and able to not just think positively all the time, but see our deficits, see our challenges, experience our hardships. That's why mindset and positivity are often conflated, but they're not the same thing even remotely. And I hope I explained that well without being too verbose. We joked before this podcast started how I'm a talker. So hopefully I said something in there that is of merit for your audience.
I honestly, I think that's packed with value. And the point that I want to push on here too is where you started to say, going down the road of that self-awareness and, really understanding the depths and the core of what mindset actually means. So me, for example, I'm sitting here thinking, I have to consciously, like, I am all about like focusing on the positive. If I could choose on pursuing opportunity versus troubleshooting something that's negative, I'm going to go opportunity every day of the week. But I also know that that can be a weakness of mine, is that I don't like to go into the hard stuff. I have to kind of force myself into it. I have to have the tough conversations that I maybe don't want to have. And that's been a huge, growth and focus of mine, as of the last several years. So I guess, Brian, when you are thinking about everything you just unpacked there with equating mindset to not being the same thing as positive thinking, you kind of threw out, people focus on habits, they focus on these things.
Yeah.
What are the things that actually matter that people should or could put some attention to that would actually be impactful?
Drivers. So I'm going to take your example, because in 22 seconds, you explained better than what I did in 17 minutes. So that was perfect what you said. And I'll use myself as a reference point. Look, I've made bad decisions in my life. I've made, decisions or choices that were not, serving for me. They didn't have good outcomes. Now, what I could do if I was a positive thinker is just frame it as, well, it's meant to be. And all roads lead to where I am now, and I wouldn't change that. So all good. There's merit to that. There's merit to not digging yourself a trench and, proceeding to throw yourself into it. So positive framing is a very good thing. But here's a better thing. But why did you make that decision? What was the driver behind the decision? What was the driver behind the choice? And what you so eloquently explained is that your capacity to put a positive frame on opportunity over negativity, ostensibly it's right, and it looks right and it feels right. But the driver of why you're choosing opportunity is that maybe, and I'm not trying to fill in blanks to what you've discovered, but maybe you're particularly like kryptonite, hard work or hard this kind of work is like kryptonite for you. So I don't want you to not put a positive frame on things, because what I teach all my elite athletes, all my corporate executives, we perform how we feel. So whenever there's an opportunity to put a good positive frame on something, do it. But the work doesn't stop there. The work now goes into, but why did I make that decision? What was the catalyst? What was the driver? Maybe I'm insecure. Maybe I don't believe in myself. Maybe I don't trust myself. Maybe I don't think I'm smart enough. These are the things I just said there. They're not allowed in the self-help industry because they're not rainbows and puppy farts. But if we're talking about real self-awareness and real change and real ascension into actually achieving the things you're truly capable of, those are the essential conversations to have. So drivers, what's driving you to make the decisions? What's driving you to make the choices? I talk about this all the time with certain demographics. Very few people are confused anymore that an apple is probably a better choice than a bag of Doritos. So why do I keep choosing the bag of Doritos? I can positively frame it. Well, it's just a bag of Doritos, or if I don't worry about it mentally, neurologically, it won't affect my body the same way. Okay, I can get behind all of that. But if you repeat the behavior of choosing the Doritos over the apple, you don't need any more education as to why the apple is a better choice. What you need is to go upstream and understand why you keep choosing the Doritos. If you unlock that, you unlock everything.
Hey, Brittany here. In case you hadn't heard, our latest book, Dream Architecture, is available for the taking. Think about it like this. What is your biggest, wildest dream of what retirement could look like? Not the dream that your friends have, or your parents maybe had, or your coworkers. Your best dream, the unreasonable one, the one that you might have trouble admitting even to yourself. So that is what the Dream Architecture book is about. Hop on over to dreamarchitecturebook.com so you can start dreaming big today. So this actually pivots me a little bit here. And to give a little context before I ask my next question, a lot of our listeners are people who are navigating a major transition in life. And that can be something that's upcoming or something that's just recently that they've gone through. So this could be a sale of a business. This could be years and years of creating massive impact in a career, in a job for a company. We do have some that they've had a loss of a spouse and they're looking for a little bit of inspiration. So there's all these things that our listeners are going through. How would you say people could best utilize their mindset when it comes to navigating major transitions? And I have a part 2 to this question, and I try not to do this, but how would they go through it? And then what are things that they can do to be kind of keep it sustainable? Because, and I'm going to give this story quick, and then I promise I'm going to be quiet so you can talk, is that a lot of times what we've seen happen is we'll have somebody who has had years and years and years of massive impact. They've been a decision maker. They've been the lead. They've been in the control seat. They've been making all the decisions. They've been, kind of King Tut. And then all of a sudden, they're the person who takes out the garbage at home. Their business is gone. The sale has happened. The team is no longer, or at least no longer theirs to control. So that's kind of my 2-part is number 1, navigating the transition. Number 2, sustainability.
Yeah, I love the way you ask questions. That was great. So look, the short answer to the question directly is identity shift. So that's what we have to look at now. And let me explain the functionality of how we do that. But in order to frame that properly, we have to appreciate the way the human brain works. Okay, evolutionarily speaking, the human brain is actually a very negative instrument. We create what's called neural tags, and these are things we hold on to for durations of lifetimes. In that this incident caused fear in me, this incident caused anxiety. The human brain is meant to keep you alive. That's its number 1 job. So any event or influence or moment in time where your brain perceived your survival was at stake, it will imprint that moment on your brain as a neural tag and be able to call about the memory, the emotion, and everything else in a moment's notice. It's not because our brains, are jerks that are trying to be annoying to us, but more directly, it's trying to fight for our survival. Now, the reason that's important to understand is this. The greatest threat any human brain will ever experience is change. That's, again, the brain wants predictability. It wants you to live in a little bubble where you get up at the same time, you do the same things, you perform the same tasks, you do them all in the same order. That's what your brain wants. because as much as we think of ourselves as free-spirited and spontaneous, in reality, our brains are not. Our brains are wired for predictability. Anything outside of predictability creates what's called neural threat in the brain. So, and now we're talking about hormonal, serotonin gets suppressed, dopamine gets suppressed, cortisol goes up. We start to feel the effects of that stress. So selling a business, retiring, like these are joyous things. You've done well, you've done great. You get to pocket a good amount of money and kind of be cushy now. And that's the end game for so many entrepreneurs. Then why does it meet with so much stress? Well, because the brain likes predictability. It worries about your survival. If we start to step outside of what your brain doesn't know, it'll push back heavily and create threat conditions that leave you anxious, uncertain, second guessing, all kinds of different things. Okay. So how do we combat that? Well, the answer is this: the human brain is very, very plastic. And what that means is that it's adaptable to change. So it will change given stimulus you provide it. If we look at what I said before and we think about upstream, downstream, your brain is the most upstream thing there is. Your nervous system is the highest point of the upstream of you. So we have to renegotiate the way your brain sees you. We have to reinform your brain, how it's meant to interpret you. And one of the ways I always teach this is simply, you don't work for your brain works for you. Your brain doesn't conceive a notion of who you are. You provide stimulus to your brain over your lifetime to create a picture of who you are, and then your brain mirrors that back to you. Now, if you step outside that boundary, it creates a threat condition. So what we have to do to augment that threat is recondition your brain to who you are now. You have to evolve, but you have to tell your brain you've evolved. My favorite way of doing that, it's so simple and it sounds a little silly, but create an avatar like you would in a video game. Who are you now? You've sold your company, you've made your millions. Who are you now? Build a story. I mean, take a journal and write it out. Build a story of who you are, what your contributions are now, what your purpose is now, how you gain fulfillment now, what you do every day now. Paint a beautiful picture of the life you want and journal about it and think about it daily. Because one of the biggest mistakes people make with mindset is this concept I call one and done. We think we go to an event and we have this, wonderful euphoric experience and now we're good to go. That's not the way the brain works. It requires repeated stimulation to actually make a change. It will resist change and keep you right where you are, which creates a conflict. It creates a cognitive dissonance. But if I think about, journal about, write about who I am now, while I'm going through this transition, while after I've sold my company, now I'm transitioned, but I'm taking the time every day to inform my brain who the new me is. With time and repetition, your brain will just accept it as, well, this is you now. And everything you wrote down, everything you think about, your brain will accept as its new normal. Cognitive dissonance disappears, conflict disappears, neural threat disappears. So it's a matter of re-identifying yourself, which is a fun game. You can be someone new. That's really cool. Like, that's a fun thing. You can do new things. So journal about that, create a story for yourself, an avatar, but then repeat that on a daily basis. That's how you sustain it over time. Your brain eventually gets the message, okay, this is the new me.
I think there's so much gold to unpack in what you just talked about here. So one of the things that came to mind is, the power of the room that you're in and the people that you put yourself around. So, you gave such great examples here to things that people can do, like head down, you're journaling, you're creating this avatar, you're kind of envisioning and imagining. One of the things that I know myself and my partner in this podcast, Brian Sweet, believe in is putting yourself in rooms with people that are doing things that are even more incredible than what you're doing, because it forces you to stretch and it kind of helps you lean into maybe that future self persona. So I guess my question here is, as let's just say we've got somebody and they've got their journal in front of them. They're thinking about who they are now, who they are next. They're maybe trying to put themselves in a room with people that are doing the things that they want to do, that they maybe want to model after, or maybe they don't. They just want to be around successful people. What do you say when imposter syndrome kicks in?
Okay, that's a great question. So here's where I'll satisfy you on that. Everybody listening and watching, imposter syndrome kicks in for everybody. But that's not necessarily a depiction of your own insecurities or the lack of value you might hold for yourself. The brain is a very rigid instrument. When you typecast yourself to your brain, it just accepts it as that's who you are. So now if I'm going to go through the process of journaling a brand new me, a new avatar, and I'm going to get into rooms with people like Brittany Anderson, who has had more success than me, and now I'm wondering, how am I to be sitting beside Brittany Anderson? It's not necessarily a reflection of how you feel about yourself. It's much more a reflection of how your brain sees you based on the stimulus you've given it to date. So what I always tell entrepreneurs, because imposter syndrome comes up dramatically in entrepreneurs, is welcome to the club. We all experience it, not because of inherent deficits in us, because that's how your brain works. It marks an image. It marks a narrative about who you are, what you're capable of, what you've done, what your potential is to do. It marks a fairly rigid narrative and image on those things based on the influences, experiences, and stimulus you've given your brain to date. When you try to combat that, you get into those bigger rooms. You start to journal a different narrative for your next self. Your brain will fight it because it's different. It's change. Your brain doesn't want change. It's a very interesting axiom that I think, for all your listeners, if you're taking notes today, take this note, because it's going to really matter to you over time if you think of it in this way. Your brain never fights for what's better for you. It fights for what it knows. Okay, it fights for what it knows. The reason, for example, individuals who are encumbered by addictions, the reasons, for example, those who chronically diet or chronically use the new year to this is my year to get fit, the recidivism rate on those two demographics are sky high. And it's not because they lack willpower. It's not because they're stupid people. It's because they're fighting against their brains capacity to want to fight for what it knows. That's the game. Your brain doesn't fight for what's better for you. It fights for what it knows. In order to change your brain's fight, you have to feed it a new narrative of what it knows. But imposter syndrome will come up for all of us whenever we make change. I'm thinking about you, Brittany, because you're such a Renaissance woman. Like I know you well enough to know that you're not only are you involved and interested in multiple things, you're very successful at multiple things. You have great capacity for multiple things. And I can only imagine, given what I know about the brain, how much imposter syndrome you felt along the way. I know I felt it. Every time my career has gone a different direction, I spend at least a couple of weeks wondering if I'm good enough to do this, if I'm the right person to do this. Am I capable of doing this? That's not on you. That's your brain's capacity to push back. So it happens to all of us. You're not alone. Talk to somebody about it. Let them reinforce you. And here's another axiom, by the way. I think you should talk to people about it if you're experiencing it, because I always like to say better out than in. Don't hold on to it, but be cathartic about it. But also don't seek advice from people in the hopes that that's going to change how you feel about yourself. Because here's another axiom to write down. Your brain doesn't believe me. It believes you. Neurologically, that's how we're wired. Your brain doesn't believe anything I'm saying unless you do. So you have to come to the decision yourself to understand imposter syndrome is just part of the process. It's just part of brain mechanics, but it can be overridden rather easily.
that part, I can't get it out of my head about the brain doesn't believe you. It's only going to believe me, myself.
Yeah.
I think that is a really interesting thing. And I think, self-awareness is so key too. I think
Mhm.
that's really where some of this starts, is that just having the awareness that just our thoughts aren't facts.
Right.
And just because our brain's going one direction, it doesn't mean it's the truth. So I'm a big believer in people not only learning from teachings, but learning from examples from others. So I'm going to put this
Yeah.
on a little bit of a personal spin for you. What is a time that you've had a major obstacle that you're like, man, because we've all been there, where we're like, is this really
Mhm.
worth it? I don't think I can go through something like this again. How you overcame it and came out on the other side.
I could think of like 40 examples in my life that actually work in that equation. So, I mean, I can use something very contemporary. So for many years, starting in about 2001, I was considered amongst the most foremost leaders in the world of youth fitness and youth sports training. I built a company that was an educational outpost. I assembled a board of directors. I was a consultant for Nike. I gave seminars and workshops all around the world, New Zealand, Australia, all over Europe and North America. New York Times, Newsweek, like I was the youth fitness guy. And in 2011, the two companies I had built in that particular industry, I sold them. And I was not expecting the onslaught in my own head of what would happen next, because I woke up one morning and I was no longer the youth fitness guy. Like that was a lot. That was 12 years of my life I spent building those companies and cultivating a reputation and establishing credibility. And then one Tuesday I woke up and the I's had been dotted, the T's had been crossed on the contract for sale. And I woke up one morning and I wasn't that guy anymore. And that was jarring. It was very jarring. Now, I mean, great. I made some very good money from the sale of those two companies, which gave me the leverage and the ability to spend 6 months trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And so I'm particularly understanding of the privilege I had in that moment. But it took me 6 months to decompact myself from the definition I carried of who I was, to establish a new definition for who I wanted to be. And I think that's why I'm so fervent about teaching it now, because I lived it. And I've lived it. That was one case example, Brittany, but I've lived it multiple times in my career and my personal life, having to redefine who I was. But I did everything I talked about today in this podcast. I journaled the next me. I future casted who I want to be and why. I learned something about myself in those 6 months. And I don't mean to sound hubris, but it's part of the narrative I carry now. At the beginning of this podcast, you were very kind to list me as one of the world's leading experts on mindset, right? And thank you for that. I appreciate that. But 24 years ago, I was one of the leading voices in youth fitness. Two very different things. What I learned about myself in those 6 months is that I have the capacity to become a world leading expert in anything I want. I learned that about myself. And so I did. And that was part of my narrative. That was part of my undoing of the old narrative. And I stance into my new one. But in terms of challenges, man, imposter syndrome, second guessing. There were multiple days where I wanted to call my business partners and ask if I could buy it back into the company. That's how jarring it was for me.
Wow.
So look at it, personal lives, business lives, entrepreneurial lives. I think, Brittany, the biggest one for me is parenting. It doesn't come with a playbook. And I don't know a parent who hasn't felt like a complete fraud. And boy, did I just mess my kid up bad for life, who has not experienced that. But everything we talked about today, because challenges, obstacles, everything I just listed, parenting, personal life, athletic life, I could tell stories for the next 25 minutes. So no matter what you're traversing or what you're going through, please find solace in understanding that brain science delivers a lot of solutions, meaning what you're experiencing is normal and natural. It's part of the brain's mechanism of keeping you safe. But the story you tell yourself becomes the truth you know. And that's top down, meaning if I adopt a story of this is who I am, and I really sustain that story day after day, I think about it, I journal about it, etc. It's not just my brain that accepts it, my physiology accepts it, my body, everything about me accepts it. And now I start to behave like that person. So I don't know if I hope I answered your question well, but everything we talked about today is a solution for anybody who's traversing those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, it was dead on with the answer. So I think, a nugget, and this is what I would love for our audience to really ruminate on, is that if you think about everything that was just said there, is really this underlying thread of hope, right? So no matter what you're going through, no matter what that really difficult time, because let's face it, there are some really, really horrible things that can happen. And
Yes.
again, trying to kind of come back to the beginning of this conversation, how mindset does not equate to like toxic positivity. It's making sure that you are aware of where your mind goes and how you can be in control of it versus let it control you. So
Yes.
I think that thread of hope is so powerful and so important for people to understand.
Yeah.
And it goes back to, I think about one of the first places that I connected with you and Carrie, and then one of the last places in person was at a couple different masterminds. So
right.
we're in rooms with really cool people. That's how I got to meet Brian Grasso and Carrie Campbell.
Right. Yes.
And just being around people that are, living, breathing examples of what it means to forge through the fire and to create opportunity and impact in massive ways. Now, I also think about it, and I think you can relate to this, BG. You can be sitting in a mastermind meeting or even journaling, listening to a podcast, and you have these moments, these breakthrough moments where you're like, oh my gosh, the dots just connected. I can see what's next for me. I can see where I need to focus. I just solved a problem that's been ruminating in my subconscious for so long. But the problem is that those moments are fleeting.
Yes.
And unless we take action towards them, they can get lost too. So when you think about those breakthroughs, can you just touch on a little bit more of that sustainability? How do you hold on to that moment and have it work for you versus being something that was fleeting that you talk yourself out of?
Yeah, really great point. So it's a lot, but I'm going to really condense it, I promise. Breakthrough, beware the breakthrough. Beware the breakthrough. It's an emotional stimulant, which is not bad. I would never suggest that. But remember how I said before, and I think, Brittany, you really enjoyed it, like your brain doesn't believe me, it believes you. So I can go to an event that is, raucous and motivational, inspiring, and there's music and there's lights and there's a great speaker on stage who's revving me up. And I can get caught into the emotional output of that. Like, I feel great. I feel unstoppable. I feel like nothing can stop me. I feel like what this motivational speaker is saying to me about me, I can do anything. I'm in that verve. The general problem with that, and it falls underneath the category of your brain believes you, not that person, is that we have to separate conscious brain from unconscious mind. So there's roughly, all of us have between 60 to 85,000 thoughts a day. The numbers are not pleasing to know them. 60 to 85,000 thoughts a day. Roughly 80% of the thoughts we have, which are unconscious, are negative. And 70+% of those negative thoughts are recurring. So the things I'm saying that are not particularly nice about me or my prospects or my potential, I'm saying every single day. Now, I can get caught up into the emotional tizzy of that room because there is an energetic reality of what, and look, it's designed that way. And I'm not throwing shade at it. It's designed that way because what it's going to cause you to do is spend more money. And that's the way it's designed. No shade. I'm all for it. But the emotional you're feeling is meant to move you to the next step of purchase. That's the point. But as soon as, like, when you walk away from that auditorium, that event, and maybe it's 5 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours later, the euphoria is gone. The dopamine you got, and that's like, those events are meant to be dopamine provocative. They're meant to make us feel a certain way. When that dopamine's gone, you're left with what you believe is true about you. Now, if we follow the science, I hate that term, but if we follow the science, 60 to 85,000 thoughts a day, 80% are negative. You don't believe those things about yourself. And I hate to say it so matter of factly, but numbers are really hard. They're stubborn things because they show us the truth we might not always want to see. As many as 85,000 thoughts a day, as many as 80% of them are negative. You, me, we're all kind of the same. We don't necessarily unconsciously think that highly of ourselves as we'd like to think we do consciously. And that's why I go back to the avatar creation and the repetitive nature of it all. It's not enough to go to an event. It's not enough to write an avatar story once. Notice how I've said multiple times, every day, rewrite parts of it. Every day, write, different variations of it. Every day, think about it. Because the human brain doesn't work on the breakthrough. I know we'd like to think it does, like we have the aha moment and now we're good to go. It doesn't work that way. We have neural tags. We have neural pathways. We have standardized ways of thinking. We have a brain that is trying to comport us into what it knows. So the breakthrough doesn't change any of that. It gives us a dopamine hit. It gives us a really nice emotional feel, but it doesn't undo or change all the things we just talked about from a brain standpoint. So what we have to look at now is repetition. It's not that 80% of the 85,000 thoughts a day I have to be negative. It's just that's the way our brain is wired. But I can rewire it. I can build an avatar. I can count my wins. I can get into my journal every single day. I can think about the places I'm going and what my next me is going to look like. I can think about those on a regular basis, and I can rewire, I can re-engineer the way my brain actually perceives thought. So yeah, the breakthrough is, man, it feels good, but it's a dangerous thing because we do leave it as a one and done, but it never works that way. Sustainability is the key. And the unconscious mind and the conscious brain, they work on repetition. You don't realize this, and I'm speaking abstractly to whoever this might apply to. You don't realize this yet, but one of the reasons you can't seem to make the money you want is because you have a narrative somewhere that doesn't believe you're worth it or smart enough to do it. You might have tried to lose the weight sustainably, but you don't realize this, that the reason you can't or don't is because you have some kind of narrative that is probably not being very nice to you. And it's certainly making the case for the point that you can't lose weight sustainably. That's not who you are. Like, we all have those narratives holding us back. So yes, we have to be honest with ourselves and see them for what they are, but we also don't need to be helpless and thinking that they can't be changed, because they can be, and they can be quite easily. But it takes sustainability and repetition to make that happen.
Mm. And, this fits so perfectly into the conversations that we've had on this podcast up to this point too. What's the analogy? It's like inspiration and motivation. It's kind of like bathing. Like, you have to keep doing it in order for it to work. And I think the same is true for your mindset, and everything that you've unpacked here today, I think has been so incredibly profound and so truly helpful. There's a difference between somebody that comes on and is all motivation and sunshine and let's go versus the true, as you said, the science behind it and what we can actually do to help ourselves as we moved into the next rendition and then the rendition after that, and that reinvention that continues to happen. So before I ask my last couple questions, how could somebody get a hold of you? If they want to follow you, they want to learn more, what's the best way?
I'm such a maverick because I usually just give my cell phone number out. Honestly, like, text me. I'm happy to engage in a conversation. I'm not that guy who needs you on my list. It's just not me. But I'm happy to tell you, I recently availed myself of 1980s technology. I actually have a LinkedIn profile now. So you can find me on LinkedIn, right? It's Dr. Brian Grasso. And I should probably, hopefully be the only one that comes up. Dr. Brian Grasso. It's Elite Human Performance. So just send me a message on LinkedIn. It'd be my honor to answer any questions or engage in a conversation. Do you mind before I don't want to I don't want to take more time than I deserve, but can I just say one more thing?
Please do.
Okay, so let me just add this one note, because it usually is a fascinating point for high achievers to learn about. And I imagine a lot of your audience, if not all of your audience, is high achieving, high performing people. And that's who I work with, like high achieving, high performers. So my doctorate is in theology, right? And I'm not religious, but I find so much wisdom, sagest wisdom in antiquity. Marcus Aurelius, Lao Tzu, the Bhagavad Gita, meditations, like the books, the reference points, the lessons we can learn from spiritual history it's mind-blowing to me. And one of the things I love to explain to people is that hypotheses put forth by Lao Tzu 3,000 years ago are being proven true by modern physics today. So there's so much wisdom there. That's why my doctorate's not in psychology. I think that's limited. It's not in neurology, because I think that's limited, but it's on a branch of philosophy that really opens our thoughts to what this really is, and why we don't have to be slaves to the way we think necessarily at all. But the reason I bring that up is to say this. Buddha was the first to really talk about this, but it was echoed by many spiritualists in antiquity. There's something called the middle ground, and he warned us. He warned us to follow the middle path. Now, in a elaborated literature, what he explains is this: we have to appreciate physics. What goes up is going to come down. So if we go to events that charge us emotionally, we're way up here. It's a matter of hours before we're now way down here, because we can't recreate how we felt. And that's the game. We put more money down to experience it again, right? But the middle path is a archaic way of explaining the dopamine cycle. Now, Buddha didn't know what a dopamine cycle was, but he explained it well in this philosophy of the middle path. High achievers, high performers tend to be dopamine addicts, and they have dopamine cycles that are not particularly healthy. So what usually happens for high achievers, high performers, is that we attach our dopamine cycle to the outcome. Right? When we sell the business, when we make the 7 figures, when we land the client, we feel great. Everything leading up to that is just the work we have to do to get there, right? The problem is that now we're in that territory. What went up is going to come down. We land the client, we hit the 7-figure marker, we sell the business, and now our standards are in a very different place. We want that dopamine again. And so we just basically keep doing the same stuff to get that dopamine hit. What I'm suggesting, what Buddha suggested, is the middle path. Learn how to transition the dopamine cycle to the process, not the outcome. Do good work every day. At the end of the day, feel great about the work you did that day. That's where the dopamine should be. It shouldn't be on the high-end event. It should be on the high-end sale. It should be on the high-end contract signed. It should be on the work that's necessary to get you to those places. So, and a different podcast, a different day, Brittany, we can talk about how to do that. It's not mysterious nor challenging, but high achievers, high performers tend to have dopamine cycles that are very unhealthy. And that can lead to addictions, food, porn, drugs, alcohol. But more notably, I get concerned about the mental health of high performers, high achievers, who are nothing's ever good enough, because they get here and then it drops. So they have to get back there or above just to get that dopamine hit again. But if we apply the dopamine hit to the process, now we're in a good, that's serving healthy. That's where we want to be. So I just wanted to add that. I hope it's okay.
Well, first of all, it was more than okay. Honestly, as you're explaining through this and the dopamine hits and then applying it to the process, man, you could change so many people's lives by just getting that message and that thought process out and teaching it, because I can literally rack through hundreds of people in like seconds in my brain that applies to, where it's like you hit this next level of achievement and then you actually go into a state of depression, and then the next thing comes and it's cool, and then the depression kicks in, and it's this crazy roller coaster that is not fun. And to your point, I've watched so many people go to the dark side of some of the things that you've mentioned, where there are addictions, there are struggles, there's mental health challenges, those things. And I think you're right, this is a whole other podcast conversation, because that is something that needs to be talked about more and more.
I think so too. I'm not inviting myself back to your podcast, although it would be an honor. But
You're already invited back.
It's a very important, and it's like you said, you could rifle through your brain and think of hundreds of people. I think every high performer, high achiever falls into that category, is that nothing's ever enough. And it's not because they're greedy, and it's not because they're selfish. It's just they're being controlled by a particularly powerful hormone that they've inadvertently attached to a certain part of their cycle. If we detach it from there and attach it somewhere else, it's just a healthier place, much healthier.
And I would imagine that a lot more gets done too. I mean, I think about myself, for example, it's like those times of high achievement are so exciting, but then the other stuff can feel a little mundane, and it's like, I don't really need to do that right now. Like, that's not really important. I'm not on a call with somebody. I'm not making change or impact. So it doesn't matter. And it's like the other stuff does matter. And it's what moves you towards those bigger momentous things in life, call it. So I think this is very, very applicable.
Absolutely. Agreed. 1,000,000% agreed.
All right. Well, I had two questions, and I'm just going to give it away because you already answered one of them. One of them was going to be, what didn't I ask you that I should have?
Dopamine.
And so you already nailed that one out of the park. The other one is, because this is the Dream Architect Life podcast, BG, what's a big dream for you? Like, what's next on your horizon? What's something that you are really excited about?
Yeah, I'm going to do two things, but they're short, I promise. So when I was 18, I hurt my back fairly badly. And I tell a story because I'll never forget it. The doctor in the white coat, so he was authority, of course, told me that I'd never be able to be athletic ever again, and that I should just kind of get used to being sedentary, because I run a risk if I get too robust with exercise. And so I took that on as an identity and a self-fulfilling prophecy for the next 10 years. I went from being a star athlete in high school to being almost 300 pounds in my late 20s and very unhealthy. But I did what I've informed all of your watchers and listeners to do. I re-identified myself. I created a new avatar, and I sustained it by referring to it daily, every day. And I changed everything. I went back into robust physical activity. I became a fighter. Like, I did a lot of things that nobody thought I would be able to do when I was 18. But now I'm 51. And about 4 years ago, I got into powerlifting, which is as contraindicated as it gets for somebody who's got a bad back, especially at an advanced age. I don't consider myself advanced, but the powerlifting world does. So by 2027, my intention is to win the world championships of powerlifting. And I'm going to do it. And I've built the narrative so heavily in my head that you could line up 100 people to tell me all the reasons why I won't win. I wouldn't believe you, because the narrative is so locked. I've seen it. I've seen myself win 4,000 times a day. So obviously I got excited about that. You can probably tell by the tone of my voice. And then from a business perspective, Brittany, I spent the last 23 years in what I would consider to be I was far from a celebrity, but I was center stage. When I built my companies in youth fitness, Time Magazine, Newsweek, consultant for Nike, speaking all over the world, I would get recognized in airports. And then, my wife and I, we ran Brian and Carrie in the Morning, a very popular live stream, 250,000 views a month. Her and I started getting recognized in airports. And I loved it, but I know the time for me now is done with that, at least right now in my career. I don't have any desire, not that I had a desire, but I'm going the other direction with my career. I don't really want to be a face. I don't want to be known. I don't want to be recognized in airports anymore, because that's weird. So now with Elite Human Performance, what I do is I work primarily one-to-one with high performers, high achievers. And I'm really excited about that, because my days are different. I'm not a public face anymore. I don't post much on Facebook anymore. I get to work with people who are either elite athletes, elite corporate executives, elite entrepreneurs, and I help guide them through everything we've talked about today. And I find the work enriching and fulfilling, and the intimacy of the relationship is one that gets me so excited. I still love public speaking. I still do speaking events all over the world because that's just fun for me. But, and I never thought I'd say this, I like right now one-to-one a lot more than I like one-to-many. And that was not my life for 23 years. So that's exciting for me now in a big way.
Well, that is incredibly exciting. And I would highly encourage anybody that's listening right now, if you just fit the mold of anything that BG just described, reach out, because this is just a sneak peek at the impact that he's made. And I will say, I've had the great honor and pleasure of speaking to a couple of BG's groups at 2 different times. And the quality and the caliber of people that show up in those spaces and that you've been able to serve and to help has just been, so humbling and incredible. And they're all just amazing human beings. And I know that's a reflection of their leader. So I know you're not trying to be on the stage and in the center of everybody, but I have this feeling that you just can't help it. It's just that magnetism. And I think that that's just part of who you are.
Actually going to take that, especially because it's coming from you, and I have just the biggest love and respect for you possible. I'm going to take that into thought because, maybe me being on more stages is a good idea, given what you just said. But I really appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Well, thank you for your time today. We know it's the only commodity that you can't make more of, so we sincerely appreciate it.
My honor. Thank you. And find me on LinkedIn. That's the first time I've ever said it. I feel so cool.
We'll make sure it's in the show notes in case you forget what your name is on LinkedIn.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up today's episode of the Dream Architect Life podcast. If you liked what you heard here, be sure to share it with a friend. Give us a like so that you are the first to know when the next episode drops. We'll catch you right back here next time.